The moment you react, you lose. The moment you explain yourself, you hand over control. The moment you justify your choices to someone who didn't ask, you have already surrendered. React, explain, justify. The most powerful person in any room never needs to defend themselves. But here is the question almost nobody asks. What is the psychological state that makes this possible? There is a concept, one of the most dominant minds in history all quietly understood, that I am going to reveal before this video ends. A state that Aristotle described centuries ago and that modern neuroscience is only now beginning to prove. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly why your reactivity is a vulnerability others exploit, why explaining yourself is an act of submission, and how developing non-reactive presence will permanently change how you move through the world. As the Stoic philosopher Epictetus once put it, "No man is free who is not master of himself." This is the psychology of real power, and it begins with understanding exactly what you keep giving away. Think about the last time someone said something that got under your skin. Your heart rate spiked, your jaw tightened, you felt the surge, defend, correct, challenge. In that moment, without fully realizing it, you handed over the controls. Control. This is what psychologists call the stimulus response loop. A pattern behaviorist B.F. Skinner identified where an external trigger produces an automatic internal reaction. Most people live entirely inside this loop. They react to everything. Criticism, dismissal, disrespect, as if they had no choice. But here's what emotional regulation science reveals. Reactivity is not strength, it is exposure. When you react, you reveal your pressure points. You show others exactly where to press to destabilize you. And once people know where your buttons are, they use them. Repeatedly, deliberately. Reactivity is exposure. The people with the most psychological power are not the ones who feel nothing, they feel it. The provocation, the frustration, the pull to respond. But they have learned something most people never discover: how to create space between the trigger and the response. Viktor Frankl, who survived Auschwitz, called this capacity the last of the human freedoms, the freedom no one can take from you. Between the trigger and the response lies your entire power. And the next piece reveals the one daily habit that quietly destroys that power. A habit you probably do not even recognize as a problem yet. Now, this next one touches something most people do every single day, without ever realizing what it costs them. Why do you explain yourself, really? When someone questions your decision, challenges your choice, or simply raises an eyebrow, what is the first thing you want to do? Explain, justify, make them understand. That impulse is not kindness, it is anxiety. Psychologist Alfred Adler identified that the need to explain ourselves is rooted in our drive for social validation. A primal fear that without justification, we will be rejected or judged inadequate. Every explanation you offer is a silent signal. Your opinion of me matters more than my own judgment. And here is the paradox that makes this so dangerous. The more you explain, the more questions you invite. You create a negotiation around your decisions. And once that negotiation opens, you have implicitly accepted that your choices require approval. If this dynamic is resonating with something you recognize in yourself, hit like and subscribe to keep exploring the depths of your psyche with me. Because what comes next goes even deeper. Explaining means submitting. Truly powerful people do not explain, not because they are arrogant, but because they understand that every unsolicited explanation is a form of permission seeking. And they stopped asking for permission a long time ago. But what about when silence feels like cowardice? That is where the next piece changes everything. What I am about to tell you sounds counterintuitive, but the research on this is unambiguous. Silence is not passive. Silence is not avoidance. In the psychology of power dynamics, strategic silence is one of the most dominant positions a person can occupy. Silent. Here is the mechanism. When you stay silent in a confrontational moment, the other person's brain enters a state of uncertainty. They begin filling the gap, with assumptions, with doubt, with their own anxiety. Social psychologist Robert Cialdini's research on influence shows that silence creates social pressure most people feel compelled to break. And in breaking it, they reveal far more than they intended. Silence creates pressure. Think about the most powerful figures in any negotiation, any boardroom, any difficult conversation. They are rarely the ones talking most. The person who speaks least, and speaks deliberately when they do, is consistently perceived as the one with the most control. In the words of Francis Bacon, silence is the sleep that nourishes wisdom. This is not just philosophy. Studies in negotiation science consistently show that the willingness to sit in silence without breaking it is one of the strongest predictors of favorable outcomes. People who can endure silence win more negotiations, de-escalate more conflicts, and are rated as more confident and competent by observers. The person who can be silent holds all the cards. But here is where it gets truly disturbing. Because the reason most people physically cannot stay silent reveals something about the brain that will shock you. Stop and think about this for a second, because what I am about to explain will change how you experience every confrontation you ever have. Your brain has a threat detection system called the amygdala. When someone provokes you, dismisses you, disrespects you, challenges you publicly, this system triggers what neuroscientists call the amygdala hijack. In less than a tenth of a second, your prefrontal cortex, the rational, strategic part of your brain, goes offline. Your logic disappears. You react before you think. This is not a character flaw. It is ancient hardwiring. But here is what makes it dangerous in modern life. Most provocations are deliberate. Difficult people, manipulative colleagues, controlling partners, they learn your triggers because a hijacked person is predictable. Triggered equals controlled. And a predictable person is easy to manage. Daniel Goleman's research on emotional intelligence demonstrates that people with high EQ have developed what he calls response flexibility, the neurological capacity to interrupt the hijack before it completes. The first step is not suppression, it is recognition. Naming what is happening in your nervous system creates just enough space for conscious choice. Every reaction you withhold is a power you reclaim. Anybody can become angry, that is easy. But to be angry with the right person to the right degree at the right time, that is not easy. And the ancient philosophers who understood this best built an entire operational system around it. A system far more radical and more practical than most people realize. Here is where the story takes a dark turn, because this ancient knowledge was almost lost, and the reason why reveals something uncomfortable about how much modern culture profits from keeping you reactive. The Stoic philosophers, Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, Seneca, built what may be the most sophisticated technology ever developed for mastering the reactive mind. They called it the dichotomy of control, the absolute distinction between what is within your power and what is not. Your emotional reaction to any external event, they argued, is always within your power, always a choice. Marcus Aurelius governed the Roman Empire while under constant personal attack, political manipulation, and betrayal. His private journals, never intended for anyone else's eyes, reveal his daily practice of returning to this principle. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. This was not an inspirational poster. This was his survival mechanism. Epictetus, who began life as a literal slave, understood this with visceral clarity. He had zero control over his external circumstances, but he chose, consistently, deliberately, to remain unmoved by them. And that choice made him, in his own words, more free than his masters. Freedom. The man who cannot be provoked cannot be owned. This philosophy has now been validated by modern neuroscience in ways the Stoics never imagined possible. And the research reveals exactly how this practice physically rewires the brain from the inside out. Now forget what you think you know about willpower, because the neuroscience here completely reframes what is actually possible. Neuroscientist Joseph Ledoux' research on emotional memory shows that reactive patterns are not simply bad habits. They are neural pathways, physically encoded in the brain through years of repeated responses. Every time you erupted in anger, rushed to explain yourself, justified your position under pressure, you deepened those grooves, made them faster, made them feel automatic. But here is what changes everything: neuroplasticity. The brain can rewire itself. Research from Harvard's neuroscience laboratories on mindfulness-based interventions shows that just 8 weeks of consistent non-reactive practice literally thickens the prefrontal cortex, the seat of rational decision-making, and measurably reduces amygdala reactivity. You are not your reactions. You can become something fundamentally different. Rewire your brain. The practice begins with one thing: the pause. When you feel the pull to react, explain, or justify, you pause, not because you have nothing to say, because you are choosing what to say and when. That gap is where your character lives. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. Viktor Frankl wrote those words having survived the Nazi death camps. If anyone understood the power of choosing one's response under extreme circumstances, it was him. And the social consequences of developing this capacity are far more profound than most people anticipate, because the next piece reveals how your reactivity has been working against you in every interaction without you ever knowing it. Here is what nobody tells you, and this part reveals how your reactivity has been broadcasting something damaging about you in every social situation you have ever been in. Social psychologists have studied what consistently signals high status across human cultures. The findings are striking and remarkably consistent. In every culture examined, the person perceived as highest status is reliably the least reactive, not the most aggressive, not the loudest, the most composed. Composure signals authority. Here is the evolutionary psychology driving this. The individual who does not need to react is signaling resource abundance. They have no position to frantically defend. They do not require your validation. Their value does not depend on your opinion of them. This is the unconscious calculation your brain performs about every person you encounter within seconds of meeting them. Research by social psychologist Adam Galinsky shows that people who feel genuinely powerful move differently, speak with more deliberate pacing, and make far fewer reactive micro-expressions. But here is the reversal that changes the game entirely. It works in both directions. Composure is not the result of power, it is the cause of it. Every unnecessary reaction, every unsolicited explanation, every anxious justification. These are status signals. They broadcast, I feel threatened, my position is fragile. Reacting is an announcement that someone else controls your state. And once others sense that fragility, consciously or unconsciously, they orient around it. But what comes next takes all of this and gives you the actual practice that transforms your daily experience. Let me pause here, because this is the part that transforms everything discussed so far into something you can actually live. Psychologists studying high-performance leaders under sustained pressure have identified a quality called observer consciousness, the capacity to watch your own reactions from a psychological distance, to be a witness to yourself rather than consumed by yourself. It sounds abstract. The practice is remarkably concrete. 1. Notice the trigger. Feel the pull to react without acting. 2. Name the emotion. Say there is anger, not I am angry. 3. Create the pause. Breathe slowly and wait 3 full seconds. 4. Choose your response, or choose silence deliberately. That distinction in step 2 carries enormous weight. UCLA psychologist Matthew Lieberman's research demonstrates that when you label an emotion, there is anger here rather than I am angry. You activate the prefrontal cortex and directly reduce amygdala activation. You shift from being the emotion to observing it. You are not your anger, you are the one who notices it. The waves do not stop, but the mountain does not move. This is the practice. Not the elimination of emotion, but developing what psychologist Susan David calls psychological agility. The capacity to hold your feelings without being held by them. To feel everything and still choose your response from clarity rather than from chaos. Watch, don't become. And all of this builds toward the most counterintuitive truth about power. The deepest paradox that completely inverts how most people understand influence. What I am about to reveal is the piece most people never stay long enough to reach. This is the one that changes everything, and most people never reach it because they stop just before getting here. Here is the deepest paradox in the psychology of power. The more you need to assert yourself, defend yourself, or prove yourself, the less power you actually hold. And the more unmoved you remain, the more power you accumulate, without doing a single visible thing. Paradox. Psychologist Dasher Keltner at UC Berkeley spent 2 decades studying how power actually functions in human groups. What he found is both simple and deeply unsettling. People who genuinely hold high social power do not defend their position. They do not explain their choices. They do not react to provocations because they do not need to. Their security is internal, not dependent on external validation, approval, or acknowledgement from others. And here is where the open loop from the very beginning of this video gets resolved. The state I told you the most dominant minds in history all quietly understood. Aristotle described the highest form of power as the prime mover, that which moves everything else without itself being moved. The most influential person in any dynamic is always the one whose emotional state is not determined by the dynamic itself. The person who cannot be rattled cannot be controlled. That is total freedom. Nobody can hurt me without my permission. Your stability is more threatening than any aggression you could display. Silence is not weakness. Non-reaction is not passivity. They are the expression of a mind that cannot be owned. Do you believe this is something you can train, or a trait people are simply born with? Comment unmoved if you believe it is a practice. Comment born with IT if you think it is innate. I genuinely want to know. And here is where it all comes together, where the intellectual understanding becomes something you can actually live. The question is not whether you are someone who reacts. Every human being does. The question is, are you willing to build the internal structure that makes reactivity a choice rather than a reflex? Because that is what this is. A construction project. You are building an inner architecture. Build your fortress. Every time you feel the pull to defend yourself and you do not, you lay a brick. Every time you resist the urge to explain your choices to someone who has not earned that explanation, you lay a brick. Every time you sit in silence when every reactive part of you wants to speak, you lay a brick. Over time, that structure becomes your character. It becomes how others experience you. First say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do. This is not about becoming cold or unreachable. It is about becoming the person in the room who cannot be destabilized, whose calm presence itself becomes a form of authority, who moves through conflict without being consumed by it. The unshakable person becomes the anchor everyone else holds onto. Never react from emotion when you can respond from clarity. Never explain to people who are not seeking understanding. Only leverage. Never justify your path to those who are not walking it with you. React less, live more. If this landed somewhere real for you, if it named something you have always felt but never had language for, comment unmoved mind below. That is the signal between those who understand and those still searching. Welcome to the Psyche Project. The most radical act you can commit in a world that profits from your outrage, your anxiety, and your desperate need for approval is to simply stop reacting, not because nothing matters, but because you have decided what matters, and you will not be pulled from that center by someone else's agenda. The most powerful version of you is the version that cannot be moved. Never react from emotion when clarity is available. Never explain to those seeking leverage, not understanding. Never justify your path to those who are not walking it. Unmoved, unshakable, free. If this video shifted something in you, if it named a pattern you have been living inside without realizing it, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you made it all the way here, prove it. Comment unmoved mind below. Those two words are the signal between people who are doing the work and people still waiting to start. It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it. Stop wasting your energy on reactions that serve no one, least of all yourself. Welcome to the Psyche Project.